Welcome to an episode of Book Drops. As you may have guessed from our ties and our apparel, we are having a Halloween episode today. And I am Don Boozer, the coordinator of the House Center for the Book and the manager of the literature department here at Cleveland Public Library, joined by...
I'm Michael, and I work in the literature department here at Cleveland Public Library.
And we are, as I said, going to talk about Halloween. To start our episode today, I just wanted to briefly sort of look at the origins of Halloween, where it came from. The traditional wisdom is that it sort of came from a Celtic, festival where the veil between the living and the worlds of the living and the dead sort of like went down, and you could communicate with your ancestors and all that sort of thing. And towards that end, we're going to talk a lot about horror, and we're going to talk about some, blood and gore and things like that. But I think those Celtic roots, I think, are always kind of interesting as well. And I really think that that's an untapped mythology. I think that a lot of potential is still there that hasn't really been tapped. One of the series that always gets sort of lumped in with fantasy is the series from the 1970s, Evangeline Walton's The Mabinogion series that talked about Welsh mythology. And she has a series of 4 books that are... And Welsh always gets me with all the L's and W's and the way that they're written. So the Prince of Annwn, the Children of Ddir, the Song of Rhiannon, the Island of the Mighty are the 4 that are in that series. And like I said, it's lumped into fantasy, but it really is a fairly traditional retelling of the Mabinogion cycle. And so the whole, not only the Celtic mythology writ large, the Selkies and all the sort of mythological creatures there, but the subset of that, even within the Welsh ballads, are, like I said, a really untapped resource that I always encourage people to sort of delve into that as well. So, and at least for me, and I'm curious to get your take as well, is I think that the whole idea of horror and the catharsis that you get from seeing like at least it's not happening to me sort of thing, at least in my mind, goes back the whole way to the Greek tragedies. One of my favorite lines from the Oedipus Tyrannus by Sophocles was sort of brings this to the fore. One translation is, "At each blow the bloody eyeballs bedewed his beard and sent forth not sluggish drops of gore, but all at once a dark shower of blood came down like hail," which is like, okay, you put that in a movie, that's gonna be right up there with some of the stuff that's out there already. And I still maintain that good old Beowulf is a classic monster tale. So you get 3 monsters for the price of 1. So we have Grendel and his mother and the dragon. So I think that I sort of imagined whenever I was putting this together of the bard sitting in the darkened mead hall, singing the ballads and sort of evoking the horror of Grendel and all that sort of thing. So I think the tradition, I think, goes back a ways. But I will stop talking and let you talk for a little bit.
So I would agree with you. Some people say that every story essentially comes from Ovid, right? The Metamorphosis. And I think the elements of blood and violence and death is really the only thing that we share, right? That's the only thing that's across cultures is, well, gore, right? It's easy to relate to. Yeah, I totally agree.
Everybody bleeds.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone's afraid of, death and pain.
And do you think that, I'm curious to sort of get your take too on the whole idea of the idea of catharsis being you see horrible things happening, like the Oedipus with his beard bedecked by eyeballs, and it's like, hey, at least it's not happening to me, and you breathe a sigh of relief. And
yeah, I think like when we watch horror movies, like those deaths are completely unreasonable, right? Like
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's pleasure in the unreasonable violence, I think. Yeah, I agree with that.
Which I think brings up, and I didn't really think of it until you mentioned that, but I think that brings up the interesting contrast between things like true crime and reading true crime and watching a completely unrealistic, chainsaw massacre sort of, scenario.
Yeah, it's curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. And there's also something to be said about sort of trying to see the limits of our bodies. Right. We don't realize we're capable of feeling certain pain or enduring certain violences and still surviving. I think that's an aspect of it too. That would go back to the interest in people with crudely disabilities, right?
Right.
Early on in the
Sideshow sorts of things
Exactly.
and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And all the people, like hammering, nails through their tongue and, that sort of thing. And
exactly.
as,
Yeah,
as a spectacle sort of thing.
up to like tattoos now,
Yeah.
and whatnot. Yeah,
And I guess it goes back to the entertainments in the Coliseum, with the hunts and the gladiatorial games
Yeah.
and all that sort of thing. It's that vicarious sort of, well, at least I'm not down in the sand.
well, football,
No.
right? I mean, that's
With the whole concussion protocols now. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Jeez, oh man. Yes, exactly. That's a very good point. I hadn't even thought of it that way. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I am curious to ask you if you have any particular Halloween memories or anything that either growing up or.
You know, I have innocent Halloween memories, nothing crazy, but as an East Sider, so all East Siders, at least during the 90s, I don't know if this is still true, would go to the Lake Farm parks for hay rides. Have you ever heard of the hay rides? And they're really innocent and cute.
Exactly.
But there's like really long lines to actually get on one of these carts to view them. But the memory I always think of now that the Guardians are in the playoffs, back when this was a baseball town, when you were in line, they would have the playoff games on the televisions as you're waiting in line. And it was like a really serious thing. Like you did not want to miss a pitch. And this was every October in the 90s. And then they sort of fell off. But yeah, that's what I think of. Even hearing Bob Costas last night calling the game like reminded me of the 1997 World Series. Yeah, so that's my
That's
Halloween
great.
memory.
That's great. Yeah, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, so I remember dressing up in costumes, and actually we had to drive to our Halloween trick or treat stops because we were that far apart. We had our own little neighborhood of maybe 7 or 8 houses, and of course, it's like all the kids got together and we did those, and then you piled in somebody's car and went to the aunts and uncles and that sort of thing, and begged for candy, but I can remember dressing up in costumes and things like that, and the whole plastic mask with the rubber band on the back and that sort of thing. Oh yeah,
So you were guaranteed candy, right? Because
exactly.
you
I
knew
was
that
guaranteed candy.
there were no
Exactly.
houses where,
Exactly.
oh,
That's a
that's
good
really
point.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Build-in guarantees. Exactly. Exactly. And so, we're going to talk, I think, about some Halloween movies as well. Are there any particular ones? I will freely admit that I am a big softie. I'm not a big fan of blood and gore and the Chainsaw Massacre and stuff. But I will say that the movie that, if I think of scary movies, the one that always comes to mind is Aliens, the second one in the Alien series. That movie keeps me on my seat to this day, even though I've watched it any number of times, but just the way that it's paced. And up until, even after the credits are done, I'm still not completely convinced that everything's going to be okay. So I think that's one of the ones that always sticks into my mind.
Yeah, and sort of related to that and related to body horror, which was effectively what we were discussing earlier. The Hellraiser series, I think, is hilarious and fun to see all the different pins that are placed into people's heads, all these different perversions of the body. And my favorite thing about Halloween, and really only the month of October is when I would watch movies like this, is how they absolutely beat to death the concepts. Hellraiser has 11 versions now, plus a reboot that came out this month on Hulu, I think.
Oh my.
Right? We're going to talk about Bunnicula. There's so many different versions of that.
Yep.
Every horror movie, they beat the concept to death, and that is actually enjoyable to me, only for these
Because
types of
it
movies.
seems like every time you have to sort of up the ante at least a little bit, or at least have another variation on the theme. So it's
Yeah, or you turn to comedy, right? Some of them
Ah.
just become more silly as they go on.
That's a very good point, because I think some of them really did start out as just the big long series started out as horror movies.
Yeah.
And then after a while, it was just like yeah, this is ridiculous. We're just gonna go for it.
Right, you start throwing in guest stars, random appearances
Right,
from
exactly.
people, or you mash them up, Alien versus Predator.
Right.
That's totally ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's just over the top, and it's like I do think that's a whole genre too. We're not going to get into those, but that's a whole genre too, like the comedy horror sorts of things.
Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Same idea. You learned it in middle school. There's a thin line between comedy and tragedy, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I did want to note that if you are ever downtown at the Cleveland Public Library, that the Bye Bye Man, the horror film, The Bye Bye Man, was actually filmed here in the Special Collections room, and we do actually have scratches on one of the tables from the scene. If you look up, if you go to YouTube and put in Bye Bye Man and library, you will see this room and the terrible things that happened here. So. But I do think that's kind of interesting too. One of the other things I want to do, setting is also, I think, one of those things that really changes too. I had mentioned briefly when we were planning this that cemeteries are those typical, where the zombies are and all this sort of thing. But as a genealogy buff, I have a completely different take on cemeteries. So it's more of an historical resource whenever I go to a cemetery than it is anything else than that. So, except at night, of course.
Yeah.
But I think I want to jump right in then to some of our recommendations for everybody. Why don't you go ahead, and I think you have some
Well,
legacy titles and things like that.
yeah.
So jump right in.
You were talking about setting. You began talking about like antiquity, right? And to me, Halloween is totally just New England, right?
Ah,
Or now I guess the Midwest,
Yep.
Indiana especially, right? So just thinking about that, one of my favorite East Coast writers, although she was born in California, but I believe this takes place in New York. Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I think this may be my favorite novel.
wow.
I never have an explanation for why I declare certain things my favorite. It just hits you at the right time and you
Exactly.
remember it forever.
Yep, exactly.
This is like a gothic Matilda, really short. It
I
has
love that description.
yeah, it has arsenic poisoning. If you like cats, this is a great cat novel as well. And Shirley Jackson is the best. She's so smart. She's so witty, and she's just the greatest.
Is there another filmed adaptation of that that just came out recently? Did I see?
They seem to keep making these recently, and I think it is because there's the potential for this to be really sort of twee, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Right? Like a precocious young girl involved in magic may have killed her family. I won't say. And cats, right? So yeah, it seems like they are constantly making this into a movie, but I've never actually seen one.
Okay. Okay.
And I tend to avoid it. Like
I
if
was
it's
going to
something
say,
that I
if
really
you like the novel, do
yeah.
you think it would spoil the novel if you?
Potentially, unless it was a director I was really into, like with an established track record, but I tend to stay away from it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you also brought up New England stuff. So you brought out H.P. Lovecraft, I believe, so a problematic author in some ways, but still I think absolutely pivotal to understanding the genre.
Oh yeah,
too.
I mean, some of his stuff, was of the time and sometimes over the top. He was an over the top racist often.
Right.
But still, as far as body horror goes, there's really nobody who gets better than that.
And there's the whole existential thing about humans are completely insignificant in the universe and that sort of thing too. so-
Yeah, and mythology
Yeah.
is important, which tends to not be an American thing,
Ah,
right? So he may be America's preeminent mythology
yeah,
type of writer,
yeah,
I would
yeah,
say.
I could see that.
Yeah, but related to H.P. Lovecraft, Victor LaValle, one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite novels by him is called Big Machine, but this is not that. This is the Ballad of Black Tom, which retells one of H.P. Lovecraft's most racist stories from the point of view of a black man. And this is a writer very clearly and obviously, influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. Just a great fantasy horror writer. So yeah, this is a really good, smart take on it.
Ballad of and the author's name again is
Victor LaValle.
Victor LaValle. Okay. I think it's really interesting too. Even if you have sort of that you want to have that other take on Lovecraft, he's still influential in writing and the genre now.
Yeah, and when somebody is, I would say he's beyond problematic.
We're being diplomatic, yeah.
Yeah, it's important that artists sort of directly combat that and interact with that and react against it, right?
Yeah.
instead of avoiding it.
Exactly,
So
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So this
Yeah.
is such a smart book. So yeah.
Excellent. All right. I will start out with one of mine. I would, say, if anybody is interested, and I've sort of gone with the comics and manga route today. So if anybody is interested in horror manga, you can't do any better than Junji Ito. He has some of the most disturbing images, I think, of any comic that I think I've ever seen. The way that he plays with shape and just the way that he integrates just horrific sorts of things that we went back to sort of talking about, the things that the body can do, and some of the things that he does. From all interviews I've read about him, he's like the nicest guy. He's like, oh, so it's like somebody. He definitely draws this. So his masterwork is probably Uzumaki, which is the Japanese word for spiral. So it's the weirdest premise of anything I think I've seen, and it is it there's a town that is plagued by some sort of curse that has to do with spirals. And it sounds like the goofiest sort of thing, but the way that he draws them, the way that it interacts with the citizens of the city and that sort of thing, it's just the weirdest thing. So it's some sort of supernatural, mysterious force that they have to deal with, and it is just the weirdest sort of image that you'll see. It's a 3-volume manga. Came out in the 1990s. But if you are looking to get introduced to Japanese horror, and that's sort of one of those genres too that I think the films were. There's some Japanese horror films that came out not that long ago that sort of are of the same vein. So if you're curious to get into Japanese horror manga, like I said, you cannot do any better than Junji Ito. This continues to be one of the most critically acclaimed ones in that whole genre. So
Yeah. Japanese writers, filmmakers in particular, seem to have a chokehold on horror
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
and magical realism
Right.
in many ways. Sort of the way the South Americans did, and Latin Americans in
exactly. It just sort of
the middle of the century.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess related to that, yeah, we have House, which is a great Japanese horror comedy film, but it's actually a reaction. It's an attempt to capitalize on the success of Jaws. Except there's no sharks, but there's a house that eats people. Basically, there's deadly cats in here, and it's really sort of cheesy.
Deadly cats.
Yeah, it's cheesy on purpose, is what they say. So it's just a fun sort of romp, I would say. Yeah.
That's great. I've seen some of the stills from it too, and you're right. It's just absolutely just like okay.
And I think part of the idea is they probably couldn't compete with the special effects of Jaws.
Right.
So you have to run the other direction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Embrace what you can do and just go all in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah,
That's
for
great.
Halloween, it's all about houses, castles,
Yep.
all sorts of
Yep.
stuff like that.
Exactly. The creepy house at the end of the street and all that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. I see you have Gallardi. I have to make sure that we get Gallardi in as we're discussing. So
Yeah. So Ghoulardi only lasted on the television for a couple years in the mid 60s. I wasn't born yet. My parents were just born. So it's always fascinating to me how every Clevelander seems to be aware of and knowledgeable about Ghoulardi. Because I haven't really seen much of Ghoulardi other than what I've seen on YouTube. And, this is probably the only book about Ghoulardi. So that's fascinating to me, like why we all know this guy.
yeah.
So yeah, this is Ghoulardi, the inside story of Cleveland TV's wildest ride. This is written by Tom Farron, who was a TV critic for The Plain Dealer. They used to have critics at The Plain Dealer, which is pretty incredible. It just goes into the history of Ghoulardi. The guy who came up with the idea of the character did not get any money or any success from this. So that's in there. One of the funny things about this is from 1997. A lot of people don't know this outside of Cleveland, but his son is Paul Thomas Anderson.
Oh,
Did you know that?
no.
Really, I mean, a great American director. But in this book, he's described as an up-and-coming director. Boogie Nights hadn't come out yet,
Okay.
so that's kind of a funny little thing. But
Wow.
yeah, a
So
great
was
book.
I mean I am not a native Clevelander. So did Gilardi like introduce like horror films? Was that his
So
shtick or what
yeah,
was
so
the?
every
Forgive me for not knowing. I apologize, but
every major city seemed to have a horror host because you could
Chili Billy and
purchase.
was the one Bill Cardell in
Yeah,
Pittsburgh. Yep.
yeah. So every city sort of took on the identity of the city, I think, in a lot of ways. But the films you could buy prepackaged from studios. So that's why. But you would
Oh,
the only thing that would change city to
is
city
the
was the
host.
host. But Goulardi, instead of adopting anything scary, he decided to become a hipster and sort of an ethnic hipster, right? So he makes fun of Parma a lot,
Okay.
stuff like that. He had the beard, all that sort of thing. Now I grew up with the Ghoul, who was like a
Okay.
derivative of
Okay.
Goulardi, and now there's somebody Goulardi-esque that's on TV that I guess everyone else is watching
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so Chili Billy was the one that came on like 11:30 at night or whatever
Yeah.
it was, and yep. Yep.
Yeah, so like this was only in the 60s and 70s that horror hosts were legitimately a thing, a big attraction. And then nationally, I guess Elvira was
Oh, okay.
probably the most famous.
Okay. Yep.
That's who I think of
Right.
nationally.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I forgot all about the late night horror film things, and I did not know that they could get them as a package deal, and it just like here, just shove some like
Yeah,
filler in
you
it to
can
get it on
read the
TV.
lists online. Like whatever, if you feel like you saw a movie on Goulardi, you don't know what it was, the list is there. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, wow. Looking at some North American comics now with this is Gideon Falls by Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sortino. Jeff Lemire is also the one who did Sweet Tooth that was out on that was a remake on I believe Netflix or one of the streaming services of the series. This is a sort of a psychological horror. There's more of that than there's some blood and gore, but there are basically two main threads that get woven together. There is one that is a reclusive young man who becomes obsessed with a conspiracy theory that he's convinced is manifesting through the city's garbage, so he goes to the garbage and all that sort of thing. And then there's also a Catholic priest who arrives in a small town that is, the stereotypical full of dark secrets. But one of the things that ties it all together is that there is this structure called the Black Barn, which appears throughout history, both in the city and in this town, and sort of brings along the murder and mayhem and evil and all that sort of thing, and sort of is the thread that sort of pulls all these uh, plots together in there. But it's really well done. It is it's an unsettling comic, but I think if you like that sort of thing, it is definitely worth your time. So, and this one was the 2018 to 2020 was the publishing date on that one, so it's fairly recent. So
yeah. Awesome. Let's see. Well, related to psychological horror, this isn't exactly horror, but it's very dark psychologically.
okay,
This is Yoko Ogawa's Revenge. These are like noirish horror stories,
okay,
but they're so well connected that it really is a novel, even though it doesn't say it. She's probably best known for her novel The Memory Police from a couple years ago. It won a
okay.
bunch of awards. But so I love scary things that make me think about objects differently forever.
Ah,
So in this case, strawberry shortcake is completely ruined for me.
the dessert and not the doll, right?
Right, right. So strawberry shortcake for me is now like a dead child in a refrigerator.
Oh man.
So, and then the other thing is carrots as fingers sort of forcing their way out of the ground.
Oh wow.
And Yoko Ogawa has like a thing with fingers. It seems like there's a lot of like fingers missing
Okay.
in different books of hers. So yeah, this is a great book. It's actually really beautiful too. I don't want to make it sound like it's a horror, like it's horror, it's scary, but her writing is gorgeous.
And that's the thing. I think that sometimes people think of like pulps and things like that is horror, but horror can be just as literary as anything else. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, is she Japanese or?
She's Japanese, and she's extremely undertranslated. There's only just
Oh.
4 or 5 books, but
Oh, wow.
she's won every award that you can think of in Japan. I don't know how many books she's written, but it's way more than that we have access to. So
I wonder if we should call her attention to the Clevo books, the new translators that are
Yeah.
over in the arcade there. For,
oh, I'm sure they
that.
I'm sure they have
Yeah.
a few of these. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Further along the comics route, this is Emily Carroll, Through the Woods. This is, speaking of anthologies, so this is an anthology that sort of has the idea of the woods sort of running through as the common theme, but there are, I believe, 5 or 6 different stories in here. But the thing that I love about Emily Carroll is that she does an amazing job incorporating the words and the artwork into one whole. So here is, she also does a great job of setting up the, and most of the comics will do that, will set up the suspense from one page flip to the next, that it sort of sets you up for one thing and then sort of turns the tables on the next thing over. But let's see, so this is just one example of the artwork and the words just incorporating into one whole. So she doesn't use the typesetting in the word balloons or anything like that. It's all part of just to sort of drag you through the whole idea of the story and everything. I will say that A Lady's Hands Are Cold, one of the stories, is an excellent example. That's the one that I just showed there. The short story His Face All Red is just chilling, and it's amazing because I find her interesting too because she has sort of a cartoony sort of look to her, but man, it's just like, oh, it's amazing what she can do with the artwork and the words combined into that whole.
And the idea of short graphic fiction is incredible to me because it's hard enough to write short fiction, and then having to compress a graphic novel is so difficult.
Exactly. And it is interesting. She sort of runs the gamut in Through the Woods through a bunch of different time periods. There's sort of a medievally peasant sort of vibe to one of them, and then the last one they have cars and they're out in they have a house in the country and that sort of thing. So she really does a nice job. There's a Victorian feeling to one of them, and it's a really she does an excellent job. She's really amazing.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to do something in a different genre as well.
Please.
So I'm going to throw up this play. It's a really famous play from the 80s by Jeffrey Jones, who's a collage playwright. The idea is it's not sequential.
Oh, okay.
So this is 70 scenes of Halloween, and that's exactly what it is. You can perform this in any order.
Oh, wow.
And the script itself is actually not in order, so it does go out of turn. It's a domestic drama with lingering, ghosts, witches. There's a great character called the Beast, who sort of laments his own lot in life.
Okay.
There's bickering over candy corn. One of my favorite scenes is the wife walks into the room and complains about how dull her knife is, and demands her husband sharpen it for her, right? And that's just like an right? It's so funny because something bad is going to happen with this knife, but it starts off with this argument first. It's just
now. Are they standalone scenes? Are they so it's
Yeah.
vignettes and
vignettes that if you put them in different orders, you're going to get a different story.
oh
So if you perform plays with your friends, which people actually do,
sure.
this is a really fun one to do. Yeah. It's
Now,
so
could you even like number the scenes and then pick them a random out of a hat? If you,
from a hat, of course, yeah, and that's one of the ways that directors will do it. They'll run it for a week and then do
my
a different
heavens.
version
Wow.
each night. Often imitated to the point where it's a little bit silly how many derivatives of this there are. But yeah, this is the original. So
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
You have piqued my interest definitely. I think we have to at least make sure we get Bunnicula in. So I want to make sure we get
Yeah,
Bunnicula.
Bunnicula, as we've all wondered about certain friends that we've had, are they vampires, right? Are
As
they
one does.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, the new pet comes into the house, and and the other pets are trying to figure out, like, is this a vampire or not? So yeah, and the reason why I chose this edition, which I think is the 40th anniversary, is because it totally cops
Ah.
the house cover for the Criterion Collection. So vampire killer cat, vampire killer bunny potentially.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And there's some the extra the Bunnicula has a number in the series, right? I mean,
It's
like
incredible. Every year they just keep coming out with like Bunnicula meets Godzilla. I don't know if that's an actual thing. They may do
it will
that
be.
now.
It will be soon enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so they keep coming up with these different mashups with Bunnicula. The creator, or at least his ex-wife, has been dead for a long time, but he carries it on. And now this just came out this year.
Oh.
It's the graphic novel version
There you go.
of Bunnicula, if you're interested in that.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's never ending. It just keeps going. Yeah.
You have a good thing. You want to beat it into the ground.
Yeah.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention that R.L. Stine, speaking of books for kids, is an Ohio author as well. So that's another one that has the Goosebumps series have just gone on forever and ever. But R.L. Stine is our own children's youth horror writer right here in Ohio. So we have any number of other books that are out there. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up today?
Let's see. Last thing is, again, like Halloween to me is quintessentially American,
Yep.
but other countries, other cultures also do scary really well. Great Russian writer writing sort of dark fiction, Ludmila Petrushevskaya.
Say that 3 times fast.
Well, yeah, and what I want to say about her is the titles of her collections, or as they are translated, the titles that they give them are incredible. There once lived a woman who tried to kill her neighbor's baby. There once lived a girl who seduced her sister's husband and he hanged himself. And then there once lived a mother who loved her children until they moved back in. And that's the sort of directness that she writes with. I love it.
And that seems to be typically, stereotypically Russian too. It's like, yeah.
So deadpan, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today and discussing this little romp through possible Halloween fiction. I hope we've expanded some people's ideas on what actually constitutes a Halloween story. I am definitely going to check out the play and pick things at random and see how that goes.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for joining us today for Book Drops, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.